Welcome back to the Madison Advisory AI podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Verner Thompson, and this show sits at the intersection of leadership, capital allocation, and emerging technology. A lot of the conversation around AI today focuses on tools: what's faster, what's automated, what's scalable. But the more important question is, how are decisions actually being made? Because in areas like capital formation, strategy, and investing, outcomes don't just depend on information, they depend on judgment. Today's guest, Jeffrey Fidelman, has spent his career inside that decision-making process, working with early and growth stage companies on how they raise capital, how they position themselves, and how investors evaluate opportunities. In this conversation, we explore where AI is actually helping in capital markets and where it may be creating noise, false confidence, or even weaker decisions. Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Amanda.
You've worked with a large number of companies raising capital. What do founders most consistently misunderstand about how investors make decisions?
I think there's probably two or three elements that we see quite often with many of either the companies that approach us to engage or ultimately that engage with us, despite our setting expectations or trying to initially. The first is timing. Um, unless you have warm introductions or you have an anchor investor who's making warm introductions, anyone's fundraise is typically going to take somewhere between 6 to 9 months on average. Are there outliers that take less amount of time or longer amount of time? Of course. But rule of thumb we usually use or position to our clients or just to the general public, anyone looking to raise capital, is that it takes about 6 to 9 months. And that's because, and kind of to address it from the investor's perspective, why, by the time I get to meet a company, by the time I get interested, by the time I can get diligence done, by the time I can actually make sure and confirm that there's longevity of the company, that doesn't happen within 30 days, most often. I think the second piece that ties into even the first one is consistency, right? Investors want to know that you're able to consistently execute not only on your business plan as you proposed it to me, the investor, but it's also consistency of communication. And
Hmm.
I think that whether it's from running your own business or trying to communicate with business development potential clients or potential investors, communication is paramount in providing your audience with a level of conviction, with a level of satisfaction around you are able to communicate effectively, consistently, and you are going to be there if and when there are questions that are going to come up. You're going to be there when there's good updates to share, there's bad updates to share. But as long as you're consistent, I or the investor can actually understand what's going on within the business prior to investing and then ultimately lead them to make the investment decision to move ahead and and put money into your business. So I think
Right.
those
It
two
gives the
aspects are
investor the additional confidence, if you will, when the communication strategy is consistent.
right, exactly, exactly. So I think at least those 2 points are incredibly important. If I'm kind of switching the script a little bit, from an investor's perspective, again, it's the consistency, it's the transparency. It's also being able to build a relationship with that founder, especially in early stage, especially in growth stage. Once you're making $100 million in revenue, it's a little bit less, although still important, it's less important than when you're making no revenue or your first dollar or 10 or $50 of revenue. So I think it's important for an investor or from the investor's perspective to understand who are you as a person? What are you going to do when invariably all of your plans don't go exactly as they're written in black and white in this business plan or the deck that you've given me? What can you do? Are you capable of taking this business through a pivot? Are you capable of being a fiduciary to the capital that I'm investing in your business?
Hmm.
And I think conveying that, and of course, there's nuance. We can get into it in more detail, but I think being able to convey that as a founder or even as a GP, a fund manager to your investor is also incredibly important and gives them confidence to move forward with you as an investment.
Given that, what do you think really garners or gains investors' attention?
The first piece of gaining an investor's attention is making sure that you are targeting the right investor. And I know that might sound obvious, but it's important to say because so many people out there, so many different AI companies out there are just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And it's so important that even though you've gotten a list of investors or you got a subscription to one of these investor databases, not just to filter by general industry and go top to bottom with the same email going out to everyone. At least in terms of what we've seen works for us as an investment bank for early stage companies, is that our analysts spend probably half, maybe even 60% of their time, not on the outreach, but on all the prep work before the outreach. And we have the database access already. We have our own internal CRM with a ton of notes in there. But even still, that being the case, our analysts are qualifying every single investor prior to reaching out to them. And that means looking at their LinkedIn, looking at their socials, looking at the website, looking at any other type of media properties that they have, Substack, Medium, whatever out there, to make sure that you, Amanda, the investor that I'm reaching out to, actually invests in the business that I'm raising capital for.
Hmm.
And second to that, equally as important, is personalizing the outreach, like making sure that I'm not just sending a canned email that only difference is, Amanda, here's 2 paragraphs of the same email going out to every single person.
Right.
First of all, there's a ton of like email reputational risk that comes in hand with that, where Google, Outlook are probably blocking half of your emails going out. But on the recipient side, right, how to get an investor's attention, it's making sure that that email is personalized to them. Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Investor. I've noticed you invest in or invested in XYZ company or invest in XYZ industry, or your investment thesis or philosophy aligns with what our company is doing. That's why I'm reaching out to you. So right now, with all of the social media, with all of the news outlets, with all the blogs and kind of everything that you would consider in between those, there's a constant fight for investors' attention. So the best thing a company can do is, well, quite frankly, everything that it can do to increase visibility. So, emailing investors, calling investors, making sure you have a monthly newsletter going out to all of these investors. And on that point, I cannot tell you how many of our clients end up raising capital, not because of the initial sequencing and outreach that we've done that gets them in the door, but because of third, fourth, fifth month newsletters that are going out and keeping these prospective investors updated on their progress.
Okay.
Socials as well, go on socials, go on podcasts, talk about what you're doing. There's so many different properties or mediums out there that for a company raising capital to be on just one or not really touch, 9 out of 10 or 12 out of 15 of them, it's a shame and it's a loss. And so much of this is either free or maybe in, like, call it the hundreds of dollars on a monthly basis, two, $300 if you're using different types of tools to get your name out there.
That's true. And on the other side of the token, we're talking a lot about how to garner attention from investors and what they're interested in. What do you see kind of kills the investment or the raise before it even starts?
Well, lying, I guess, first of all, and that's been getting brought up in a lot of the articles and newsletters that I'm reading now. That there's so much, especially on the West Coast, of people overrepresenting their contributions to their past companies and employers, saying that they helped with the rollout of X, Y. Like there was a meme the other day that someone helped the rollout of this AI functionality inside of like OpenAI, and then as a screen grab of their LinkedIn, and they were an intern at OpenAI. And it's like, well, maybe they were part of it. Maybe they put a period at the end of a sentence, but it's unlikely that they actually were leading the rollout of a major AI application.
Hmm.
So I think always make sure that, like, of course, first impression is incredibly important. But if you start a relationship on a lie or a fib or even like a smudge of the truth, ultimately, it usually comes out. Almost in all cases that I've seen, it does come out. And that completely ruins, first of all, reputation, but second of all, the chances of raising capital from any certain audience. And all investors talk by the time you start reaching out to even one of them. So I think also going out to raise prior to being ready. And there's a fine line between what you actually need to go out to raise versus what's nice to have. I always tell people that perfection is the enemy of done to a certain degree. So you want to have a deck, you want to have a financial model, you want to have a valuation analysis or idea of how you got there prior to going out to an investor and raising that capital. And then when you're on the call with them, you should know the metrics of your business. You should know either customer acquisition cost or how you're going about it. You should know what you're raising capital for and the use of funds, and being able to eloquently explain to the investor broad strokes. Here's, we're raising $5 million, 40% is going to XYZ costs, operational costs, business development, tech development, whatever the case may be. But being able to have confidence in what you explain to the investor. The moment that the investor feels that you don't have a lot of confidence in what you're talking about or what you're saying, is the moment that the investor internalizes that same feeling of lack of confidence in your business.
That makes sense. Given this AI environment now, do you think how do you think that's impacted the investor's story?
The founder story, or I guess from the
The
investor,
founder story,
the
yes.
founder stories. A few ways. I think that first of all, building an MVP or a product, I've said this kind of before on other podcasts, I've written about it. It's no longer acceptable to go out and try to raise 150, $200,000 to build a product, to build an MVP.
Mhm.
And I can speak about this anecdotally, having no engineering experience whatsoever. I was able to build an internal CRM for us in Lovable quite quickly. Nothing proprietary about it, but I was able. I now know a number of founders where they've almost rebuilt their entire product through vibe coding, through whether it's Claude or Lovable or a combination thereof, or OpenAI Codex or whatever. And now they have 50, 60, 80 clients on board and growing from effort that really it was a non-engineer that put into it. So I think going to market with a product, and the whole definition, which I'm sure many people have already seen and heard about, that like a seed company now needs to be making half a million to $1 million in revenue before going out to raise capital. Anything before that is pre-seed. I
Mhm.
can tell you that 10 years ago, a seed investment was to seed a company. It is no longer the same definition. It's just a word that we use with really no correlation to the initial definition that it had. So for a founder that's either has an idea or going to market to raise capital, at each of the stages or each of the names of the stages, there's always kind of certain metrics that you should be thinking about. Pre-seed is, let's call it, you have an MVP, maybe you're starting to get some clients or pilot program, maybe it's free. That's pre-seed. Seed is, you're making money. Maybe you're not. Let me rephrase that. You are making revenue. You're making revenue, and that's kind of a seed round. You're making revenue. There's a big TAM, there's SAM sum, whatever like either way how you measure it, but you're making revenue, you're starting to find product market fit, you're starting to understand and figure out your cost of customer acquisition. And then series A is when you have all of that 85, 90% figured out. And the idea is to go out to Series A investors and say, hey, look, I already have built a fire. I'm just looking for you to pour gas on the fire. So
Mhm.
that's kind of at each of those, at least initial three stages, what I would urge people to think about prior to going out and kind of raising capital. And from an AI perspective, it's such a broad answer that I have. It's so industry dependent. Broadly speaking, super helpful with product development, ideation, copywriting, most likely starts to take out middle management rather than upper management C-suite or kind of entry level types of employees. And I think that at least for now, AI is not something that can be used to be end to end, at least in,
Okay.
in my experience. And and even if it could be, I don't think that it should be.
Yeah, that goes along the line of the next question. When we were speaking, you mentioned to me that you tried to use AI in investor outreach and actually removed it. For you, what was the reason for removing it, and why wasn't it effective as you wanted it to be?
So our process in terms of raising capital, we call it more of a managed service for raising capital. So we call it Fundraise as a Service. We've subscribed to all these different investor databases, PitchBook, Preqin, Fintrix, Dakota, and a variety of others. We aggregate that data internally, and then our analysts go through that data and then do weekly outreaches to potential investors for their mandates. And they're capped at around 80 to 100 investors on a weekly basis. Because as I mentioned earlier, there's a ton of effort that goes into the actual outreach process, the research, the qualification, the personalization of the emails going out and doing that across a number of investors on a weekly basis, you start to lose bandwidth and you're capped at how many you can reach out to. So we were thinking, well, our numbers look great, conversions look great, efficiency and metrics and all of that is trending really, really well. What if we were to add in AI? So instead of pulling 100 or 120 leads or 150 leads and then kind of disqualifying some of them, let's pull 500 leads or 600 leads. Put it into an AI, and the AI's sole responsibility was to qualify and then personalize whichever investor was qualified. And we went from 80 to 100 to about 350, 400 investors that we were able to personalize and qualify on a weekly basis. We got a tool like an auto dialer where we could call 5 people at the same time. Whoever picks up was connected to the analyst, and then the others were dropped. And what we noticed after implementing that whole process was that as efficiency went up, effectiveness went down. And what I mean by effectiveness and efficiency is personalization, qualification, outreach. So how many net new investors did we engage with on a weekly basis? That number went up. On the effectiveness perspective, we were just dropping those connections like flies. There were
Right.
less meetings booked on a weekly basis. There was less engagement from overall investors, and it was because of this automation that was created. Analysts would get on a phone with an investor, read the personalization that AI created, which, by the way, this is 2 years ago, so sometimes it wasn't super accurate. And then the analysts wouldn't really know what to say next. They've never seen that investor before. They've never researched, they've never qualified, they've never done any work around that investor other than just jamming them into this AI, getting the report of this investor is qualified. Here's the first line of personalization. And when they would engage with the investor, the analyst had nothing to say beyond that first line because they have no idea who they're calling. And I mean, they know why they're calling them, but that's the whole point of canned emails that don't work. It's the same thing with phone calls. Canned phone calls or kind of these pre-recorded scripts or AIs, they don't work. And that's what I mean by end-to-end solution. I think AI can definitely be helpful, but from an end-to-end perspective, either in doing investor outreach, and there's so many clients we've spoken with that use these like AI fundraising automation tools, very, very, very low success and a lot of frustration when they come back to
Right.
us. And also, even from like an investment banking perspective, I've said this for so long, and it kind of hit me the other day about the correlation that when clients would come to us and say, "Hey, Jeff, here's an idea on a napkin, create a deck for us." The most successful clients were ones that were actually engaged in the creation of that deck. They knew why every word was on every page, why every sentence ended with the punctuation that it ended. And the moment that I would create them a deck from scratch without really too much of their input, kind of from my own perspective, and if they never did, but if they were to use that deck with a potential investor, it would be a disaster because it's not
Right.
their words, it's my words, given what their business is, put on paper that then they're sending to someone else. So it's the
That
same
is
thing
one
when
of
you
the
think
more
about.
difficult points of communication is that in some instances, if you're writing for the other party, it's very difficult for the other party to then communicate that effectively and to the right audience. And so, do you think in that regard that fundraising is more about storytelling than analysis?
It's both. I can't say it's one or the other, right? It is definitely storytelling day one. You don't really have much to analyze. You have your own business, you have some research you can do, valuation analysis, all of that. There's certainly data that you can comb through in terms of who you're targeting. But the first half a dozen investor calls, and I'll say this to every single one of our clients, the first one of the first three investor calls that you have, you are probably going to bomb and it's going to be an absolute disaster. I'm telling you now so that when it does happen, you can think to yourself, like, ah, Jeff mentioned this. It must be relatively common because it is. You try out new pitches, you try out different inflections on different like words that you used and different jokes that or anecdotes that you used, and sometimes they land, sometimes they don't. So initially, storytelling is incredibly important around how you're actually communicating your business and how the investor is receiving that communication and internalizing, does it make sense? And then afterwards, once you hit some sort of critical data junction, it's so important to have analysis and data. Who is, what type of investor is my business landing with better? Is it family offices? Is it private equity? Is it venture? Is it angels? Is it endowments, foundations, and like other types of institutions? Right. Out of all the calls that I've had, out of all the outreach that I've had, what is the best time of day, day of week? What is the best AB emails that we're sending out? Which ones have the highest open rate, have the highest reply rate? So none of that you can do day one or really like week one, two, three, or even four.
Hmm.
But it's important to collect that data from day one so that you can look back on it and make adjustments as needed.
That makes sense. And what about when it comes to valuation and analysis on that juncture? How important do you think that is versus the storytelling aspect? And can AI replicate any of that?
Yes, I think AI can replicate that eventually. My biggest concern is that I mean we've been in business for 11 years now. So we've done thousands of valuations. We have a lot of data. We know exactly what the structure needs to look like, how they need to be presented. And we've been able to feed all of that into an AI and say, "Hey, use this structure exactly as is, replicate a valuation analysis for this new client that we have." The problem is that when you go into like a bibliography or sourced information, half the links don't work, and it's not real. It's not real.
Hmm.
And I saw that a couple of times, and since then we've also cut AI out of that picture. Now, eventually, I do think that would be such a useful tool and help us first of all deliver those, but second of all, help customers and clients just go in and do it themselves directly. They don't need to pay anyone to do that
Hmm.
eventually, and I don't think it's there yet. And the
Interesting. And it,
output,
it
right?
does seem like that may be something to come in the future where AI could be incredibly helpful. Now, when it comes to storytelling, you
Absolutely.
need the human element there to read the
Right.
room and
Right.
communicate appropriately. You've
Right.
also said that AI is normalizing outputs and potentially giving everyone the same ideas. What does that mean for investors trying to find differentiated opportunities?
I'm not sure that the two are so correlated. I think that there's a recent interview with Ben Affleck, actually, of all people. He just sold his AI company to Netflix, and he's sitting there talking about how AI's output in terms of writing is a reversion to the mean. It will never have outlier ideas. I mean, never. It does not currently have outlier ideas, unique ideas, ideas of innovation, ideas of, anything other than, hey, here's an idea. Will it work? Yes, of course it's going to work. Are you sure? I don't think it's going to work. You're absolutely right. It's not going to work. I think that's like a South Park or a Family Guy episode or something like this, right?
Mhm.
And I think that that reversion to the mean creates a great tool for people that are already informed and need editorial work done to their copywriting or refining an idea, or maybe it's data aggregation and ingestion and digestion. What is best practices for SEO for this specific website or for this specific type of product? I think that's where it can be super helpful today. That being said, if you're a new entrepreneur and you're just trying to plug in like, hey, I want to make $1 million into GPT, how do I do it right now? It will give you the same answer that it's giving everybody else. And if that is the case, and you are at the top of the bell curve, then maybe you will make some money. I mean, I don't want to discourage anyone from trying anything, but just know that you are one of probably a million other people that are asking the same exact question and most likely getting either the same or very similar type of answer.
Right. Do you think that AI makes the markets more efficient or more crowded?
With a question of time, I don't think there's any one specific answer. And almost like a pendulum, it likely swings one way and then comes back to the other. So does it make it more efficient? I think that the thought initially was, yes, absolutely, it's going to make everything more efficient. I think the reality has now set into a lot of people where it's not necessarily more efficient yet, but it's getting there and we're working towards it. And I think once AI, similar to kind of like the idea of digitization that we saw so long ago, that people were like consultants coming into companies and putting them on, cloud servers or putting them onto off of AOL and onto Outlook or onto Microsoft or whatever. We'll probably have an entire business that comes out of AI implementation and whatever they're going to call it, artificial intelligization of a business or of a corporate. And I do think eventually there will be a lot of efficiency that's gained off of it. My skepticism is on how true all of that is in an open loop system, meaning it has like a GPT that has access to all this knowledge and is incentivized by, the thumbs up that it receives. How accurate is the information? Thus, how efficient is what you're getting from GPT going to be? And again, like using myself as an anecdote, I saw another, memes are a window to the truth in some way, shape, or form. There was kind of something where like day one of vibe coding is you feel on top of the world, like I'm the smartest person in the world, I'm gonna be a billionaire, this is the greatest thing ever. Day 15, you're like starting to struggle. This is harder than I thought it was going to be. I'm still getting there. Some things I need to rewrite. I'm getting there. And then by day 30, you're ready to just smash your laptop and you're cursing at GPT or whatever AI you're using. You're saying it's useless, all this stuff. Now, I'm sure that's going to change over time, but at least right now, I've experienced that, and I have so many colleagues and clients and just friends that I've spoken to that have experienced the same thing. So I think it's
Right.
a lot of efficiency early on, and then just the efficiency drops over time as you start to try to fine tune things within AI.
Yeah. So you think it's not going fast forward all in one direction. It will be a pendulum that swings, and
I
more
do.
efficiency is certainly there in some aspects, but not necessarily the long term or the entire route.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
which is that's an interesting and different take because I think a lot of people think the adoption is going to accelerate and keep accelerating more and more so as in the near term future. So we'll see how that all pans out. One interesting part of our conversation and an element where AI cannot play a role is that you mentioned in your role you often act as a therapist to founders. Why is this such a critical part of capital formation?
Founders are an interesting bunch of people. Also speaking from experience. I think you have to have a little bit of crazy in you to be a founder. And I think that a lot of founders, one line that really stuck with me when I spoke to someone, and used it often now, is that founders, really everyone, but founders especially, should always aim to respond and not react. And there's a nuance between that. And I think a lot of founders, based on how founders think and their mentality and what makes them a founder, they're very reactionary. And as you're building a business, that reactionary piece is super important. Don't get me wrong, right? Like you have to react to things early on because you're moving fast, you're breaking fast, you're just iterating and you're trying to launch a product and get it done. And I think as you move into kind of growing the business and stabilizing and actually building a business, it's so important to start switching that level from reacting to responding. And and I think that is really incredibly important when you think about founder mentality and founder perspective, whether it's with AI or otherwise. It's important to kind of, you know, build to where product can eventually be going as opposed to what can be built today. Because if you're building what can be built today, again, certainly plenty of outliers certainly can make money that way. But probably by the time you're done building it, there's 15 other people that have done the same.
Very true. Where do you think human judgment still matters most?
A lot. I mean, a lot. Judgment on, and this is the same thing around the idea of being a therapist. I would say tongue in cheek that judgment has to come. Like, it's very lonely when you're a founder. You find that you can't really speak to your colleagues or the people that work for you. You can't really speak to your clients because they're your clients after all. And you almost need this outlet of, I need to cry to somebody. I need to yell at somebody. I need to just lose my mind with someone else who understands what I'm going through, or at least can listen to it and not try to ask me if I'm getting fired or paid or ask me if, I want to become a client, but just someone who can actually have that conversation, who's maybe felt and been there before, and then talk me through it. Most times founders just want to hear that you are not alone, that someone else has gone through this before.
Right.
And all the books you can read, all the podcasts you can listen to, all the blogs you can read as well, sure, they're super helpful. But
Mhm.
unless you actually speak with a human, right? The human intervention, the kind of, as I was joking about it, like being a therapist, so to speak, I think that's so incredibly important to understand, like, how did you actually have a conversation, right? When you're reading a blog, when you're consuming information, that's not a conversation, that's a presentation. It's
Mhm.
important to have conversations with people. I think that is so incredibly important. And that's again, like I know people talk to GPT and go back and forth. Um, I've done it a few times, but I don't know. For me, I can't replace human interaction with that.
Yeah, I think there is something to be said about human interaction and the founder relationship when founders really do need a person to go to rather than a GPT or a sounding board. They do want the appropriate level of empathy and pushback in the right direction as well. What do you think that says to conclude us about the limits of AI?
It's been really tough to talk about the limits of AI because it's like every time you say that there's a ceiling, the next week it breaks through that ceiling. So it's hard to talk about it that way, but at least the way that I use it either in business or I don't really use AI in personal life, but in business and how I would, recommend to everyone else is implement it as an in-between process where you're still controlling the input as well as the output. And and only really then, once you've done it a few times and you've iterated, and you feel a little bit more confident in using it in a broader way. But right now, where its limits are, wherever they are today, by the time this podcast airs, and certainly a week after that or a month after that, the limits will change for sure. So I think it's one of those things where if you're building a company, right, depending on who's listening to this, if you're building a company or if you're thinking about building a company, or if you're thinking about using AI in some sort of capacity, there's 2 ways that you can interact with it. Number 1 is use it for everything it's currently capable of doing, and there's plenty of blogs and resources out there and Reddits and whatever about how to actually implement, like, "Here's my business, which tool is best, how do I implement it?" And then there's another kind of school of thought, which I think is important to take into consideration when listening to this or when thinking about AI is, where do I think AI is going? Let me start building towards that. And that's really where a lot of successful companies end up coming out of, where I don't know how I'm going to get to my end point. I'm going to start building today in hopes of an educated decision. Don't just like roll the dice, but in hopes that by the time I get far enough along in my build, this thing that's currently impossible will be possible.
Mhm.
And it's a gamble for sure, but starting a business is a risk. And what I can tell you is that that carries no more risk than starting a business today that others have had a leg up on for a week, for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks before you, and you're just starting to build it today. Yes, maybe you
Right.
have a better idea, a better mousetrap, a better way of launching the business, originating business, distributing it to other clients. But at the end of the day, you will be one of very, very many. Whereas if you're building something that doesn't exist yet, that can't be built yet, eventually when you do build it, you will be one of few. And that just simply gives you better chances of success, whether raising capital or just in, I don't know, generating revenue.
And I think that's the most difficult aspect to as well, to come up with the new idea, to be imaginative and really innovative as a founder. And that those are the founders that a lot of investors are looking towards, the ones who are thinking about what is coming 2 or 3 steps down and not what already exists today. But I think this has been a very grounding conversation. And we really dove into the elements of where AI can be efficient and help the markets, but also the clear importance of human judgment and the human element, especially when it comes to fundraising. I do love that you implemented and then saw that AI wasn't necessarily the right move for your particular company at that time and walked away from it. That's a difficult decision for a lot of business owners to be able to do that. So, thank you for joining us today. For our listeners, thank you for listening to the Madison Advisory AI podcast, and we'll see you next time.